It's a chilly evening in East London. On the surface, areas like Walthamstow and Leighton seem like any other part of the city. Kebab shops closing up, double-decker buses lumbering down the high road. But behind the everyday bustle lies a shadowy underworld, controlled by a gang so feared that their name has become synonymous with brutal violence. They call themselves the Mali Boys, a street gang that rose from these very streets and built a reputation as one of London's most ruthless crime networks. With an estimated 40 to 50 members, ranging from teenagers to men in their early 20s, the Mali Boys control the local drug trade through intimidation and bloodshed. Police say they've been responsible for hundreds of violent incidents in the borough of Waltham Forest alone. Their story is one of poverty, power, and profit, a true crime saga playing out in real time on the streets of East London. But as night falls, these young men transform into foot soldiers of a sprawling drug empire, enforcing their will with knives, guns, and even acid. Tonight we delve into the origins of the Mali Boys, explore their turf, and shine a light on the bloody feuds and lucrative drug routes that define their reign. This is a journey into the heart of East London's Mali Boys, a Vice investigation into a gang that's equal parts street-savvy and merciless. The Mali Boys emerged around 2015 amid the concrete estates of Waltham Forest. They weren't the first gang to roam these streets. In fact, they began as a splinter group. Back then, a local crew known as the Beaumont Crew, also nicknamed Let's Get Rich LGR, held sway in parts of Leighton. A dispute or power struggle within that gang gave birth to a breakaway faction. A group of ambitious young members broke off, determined to carve out their own operation. They formed the Mali Boys, and from the start, their approach signaled a new breed of gang culture in London. The name Mali Boys itself hints at the gang's roots. Many of the founding members were of Somali heritage, children of immigrants or refugees who had settled in East London's vibrant Somali community. Mali is short for Somali, and it became both their identity and a warning. Yet the group was never exclusive to one ethnicity. From early on, it recruited anyone who proved themselves. By the late 2010s, the Mali Boys were ethnically diverse, though overwhelmingly male, united not by background, but by a shared hunger for money and influence. They bonded on the sprawling housing estates and youth clubs of Leighton and Walthamstow, where opportunities were scarce and the temptation of fast cash was everywhere. What really set the Mali Boys apart was their mindset. A report commissioned by the local council found that unlike the older generation of London gangs who obsessed over defending their ends or postcodes, the Mali Boys had a mercenary, profit-driven ethos. Territory wasn't about pride of place, it was about business. One study described them as the most business-driven, violent, and ruthless gang in the area. They treated the streets like a marketplace to be dominated, not just a hometown to be protected. This marked a shift in gang culture. Emotion and reputation took a backseat to enterprise, and anyone who stood in the way of that enterprise was met with swift and brutal retribution. The Mali Boys' stronghold lies in the borough of Waltham Forest, particularly the neighbourhoods of Leighton, postcode E10, and Walthamstow, E17. These areas, a mix of public housing estates and terraced homes, are where the gang first took root. The streets here tell two stories. By day, they're vibrant with markets and family life. By night, they can turn into contested turf, where Mali Boys lookouts stand on corners, phones in hand, conducting street-level sales of crack cocaine and heroin. Local businesses have learned to recognize the signs: quick hand-to-hand exchanges by the bins, scooters coming and going at odd hours, but many are too fearful to intervene. To maintain their grip, the Mali Boys leveraged alliances and absorbed smaller local gangs. Groups from nearby housing estates like Drive and Marlow, Boundary, Coppermill, and Stonydown eventually fell under the Mali Boys' umbrella. By consolidating these cliques, the Mali Boys extended their influence across Walthamstow's patchwork of estates. If you were a young hustler from this part of East London, joining the Mali Boys, or at least getting their permission to operate, became almost a prerequisite for survival. They had the manpower and reputation to dominate the area's underworld. Just a couple miles south lies Stratford, home to the gleaming Olympic Park and a massive Westfield shopping centre. It's a symbol of East London's regeneration, yet it's uncomfortably close to Mali Boys territory. As their power grew, the Mali Boys didn't confine themselves strictly to Walthamstow and Leighton. Stratford and surrounding districts became fair game for expansion. The gang's dealers and enforcers began appearing in adjacent areas of Newham and Redbridge, wherever there was money to be made. If a corner in Stratford could turn a profit, the Mali Boys wanted in. Their territory was no longer a single postcode. It was any place that could be exploited for drug sales. From the crowded marketplaces of Walthamstow to the high streets near Stratford Station, the Mali Boys learned to operate in plain sight, blending into the urban landscape even as they quietly took it over. By the late 2010s, the Mali Boys had honed a business model that was as lucrative as it was cold-blooded. It wasn't enough to dominate the drug market at home, they wanted to export it. The gang became deeply involved in county lines drug dealing, a scheme where urban gangs send dealers, often children or teenagers, to smaller towns to sell drugs. On any given day, you might find a young Mali Boys operative catching a train at London's Liverpool Street Station, headed out to places like Norwich in Norfolk or seaside towns in Essex. Police intelligence revealed that the Mali Boys were using the direct line from Liverpool Street to Norwich to shuttle their product and people. In the eyes of these East London gangsters, cities like Norwich, quiet, far from the turf of rival London gangs, were open territory, ripe for the taking. They ran these operations with startling professionalism. Older gang members, often referred to as olders, would recruit school-age boys, and sometimes girls, as drug runners. These youngsters were given train tickets, cheap phones, and a pocketful of wraps of heroin or crack. A 15-year-old foot soldier could be sent 115 miles away to Norwich or to towns in Essex, tasked with setting up shop in a stranger's flat, often a vulnerable addict's home taken over by the gang. The Mali Boys provided scripts, how to text customers, which stash houses to use, and expected results. If the kids delivered, they'd get a few £100s and maybe new Nike gear. If they failed or lost product, the consequences were vicious. Many of these youths effectively became trapped, victims of grooming and intimidation who felt they had no way out. The county lines trade turned the Mali Boys into a £1 million enterprise. By 2018, police estimated the gang was pulling in around $50,000 a week from drug sales, an almost corporate level of revenue, but built on exploitation and violence. They were shrewd too. Knowing police were watching for young black Londoners travelling alone to far-flung towns, the Mali Boys started recruiting outside their usual pool. They'd send white British teens on runs, figuring they'd draw less attention from officers. They even involved young women as couriers, banking on the fact that female suspects might be searched less often. Every move was calculated to maximize profit and minimize risk to the higher-ups. But with each trip, each new line set up outside London, the Mali Boys left a trail of damaged lives. Small communities in places like Norfolk suddenly saw spikes in drug-related violence and predatory behavior, as London gang members fought locals for control. And ironically, even some perpetrators were recognized as victims. In one high-profile case, a Mali Boys member named Ayub Majduleen, who had been dealing drugs for the gang since age 14, was officially classified as a victim of modern slavery, due to the way he'd been groomed and exploited. Yet, as we'll see, that didn't stop him from later committing horrific violence in service of the gang. The Mali Boys' expansion had turned children into commodities, and the fallout was about to erupt back on the streets of East London. With money pouring in from drugs, the Mali Boys had a lot to lose, and they protected their empire fiercely. Even though they claimed to be business first and less into pointless postcode beefs, violence was still the language they knew best. Throughout the late 2010s, East London was rocked by a series of tit-for-tat attacks as the Mali Boys battled rival gangs. At the centre of this storm was a brutal feud in Walthamstow between the Mali Boys and a local gang known as Priory Court, or the Higham Hill Gang. What started the feud was tragically simple. One of the Mali Boys' own was killed, and they wanted revenge. In May 2017, a 17-year-old Mali Boys affiliate named Elijah Dornelli was stabbed to death on Walthamstow High Street. In a cruel twist of fate, Elijah had actually spent that afternoon at an anti-knife crime peace rally, marching with mothers who had lost their sons to violence. Just hours later, he was ambushed near a Lidl car park. The attack was targeted. Two young members of a rival crew caught Elijah and a friend by surprise, stabbing Elijah so savagely that he later died in hospital. The community was horrified. Elijah was known as a cheeky, football-loving teen. Now he became another statistic in London's knife crime epidemic. But to the Mali Boys, Elijah was more than a statistic. He was their friend. And someone had to pay for his death. What followed was a cycle of vengeance reminiscent of a gangland war. In the months after Elijah's murder, violence ping-ponged between the Mali Boys and Priory Court Gang. On a November night in 2017, an 18-year-old named Katem Mokrane was cornered and killed in Walthamstow, stabbed to death by a group of young men. The ringleader of the attack was later identified as Hamza ul Haq, a rising shot caller in the Mali Boys, and it turned out Katem had been mistaken for a rival. He wasn't even the intended target. It didn't matter, the message was sent. Then, in March 2018, as retaliation escalated, the Mali Boys struck again. They opened fire on a van in Walthamstow, killing 20-year-old Joseph Williams Torres as he sat with a friend. Joseph, too, had no gang affiliation. He was an innocent local man who happened to be in the wrong place, mistaken for a Priory Court member. The senselessness of these killings underscored how dangerous the feud had become. No one was safe once the Mali Boys' blood was up. Indeed, the feud saw tactics normally unseen in street disputes. At one point, Mali Boys Lieutenant Hamza ul Haq himself was ambushed and doused with acid by rivals in late 2017, a gruesome act of retaliation meant to maim and intimidate. A few weeks after Joseph's killing, police intercepted a car carrying Priory Court gang members armed with a gun, a knife and a bottle of ammonia, a makeshift acid, cruising through Leighton, presumably out to hunt Mali Boys. The war had become open season on East London streets, playing out in front of residents' eyes. But the incident that truly shocked the nation came at the start of 2019, and it involved a different rivalry, one that harkened back to the Mali Boys' origins. On the evening of 8th January 2019, a group of Mali Boys were prowling Leighton in a stolen Mercedes, looking for anyone tied to their old enemies, the Beaumont Crew. They spotted a teenage boy riding a scooter on Bickley Road. His name was Jaden Moody, and he was just 14 years old. Jaden had fallen in with the Beaumont Crew, the very gang the Mali Boys had splintered from, and was allegedly working for them, dealing drugs that night. The Mali Boys saw an opportunity for payback. In a flash, they rammed Jaden's moped with their car, sending the boy crashing to the ground. Before Jaden could even understand what was happening, 5 attackers leapt out. One of them was 19-year-old Ayoub Majdoulin. CCTV footage, too horrific to show in full, later revealed what came next. Jaden was stabbed repeatedly, at least 9 times in 7 seconds. The ferocity was unimaginable. The teenager stood no chance. Jaden's murder was brutal and brazen. The street where he fell was a residential area. People came out of their homes to find a boy dying in the road. He became the youngest victim of London's gang violence that year. The public was outraged. How could a 14-year-old be hunted down in our capital's streets? Police quickly identified the Mali Boys as the culprits. Ayoub Majdoulin, a known Mali Boys foot soldier, was caught and eventually sentenced to life in prison, minimum 21 years, for Jaden's murder. In court, it emerged that Ayoub had himself been exploited by the gang since he was Jaden's age. A chilling example of how the cycle perpetuates. The other attackers with him that night have yet to be brought to justice, protected by the gang's code of silence and fear of retribution. The killing of Jaden Moody put an intense spotlight on the Mali Boys. Media outlets dubbed them one of London's most feared gangs. In Waltham Forest, residents already knew the name. Now the whole country did. The story had all the elements of a nightmare. Children killing children, vulnerable youth groomed into violence, and communities caught in the crossfire. But for the Mali Boys, it was just another chapter in an ongoing saga of turf and territory soaked in blood. By 2019, they had cemented their status through fear. The question was, what would authorities and the community do about it? Hamza ul Haq. In the underworld of Walthamstow, that name carried weight. By 2017, Hamza, himself only in his late teens, had risen as a key figure in the Mali Boys hierarchy. Prosecutors would later label him the ringleader of the gang. He was implicated in ordering or personally taking part in multiple murders amid the gang's feud. In fact, Hamza ul-Haq has since been convicted of 2 murders: the November 2017 stabbing of Kachem Mokrain and the March 2018 shooting of Joseph Williams Torres, both carried out under his watch as revenge for Elijah Dornelly's death. In June 2023, a judge sentenced Hamza to life, finally taking one of the Mali Boys' most dangerous men off the streets. In court, details emerged painting Hamza as an out-of-control gang leader who drove the tit-for-tat violence. For years, he had managed to stay just out of reach, often ordering younger members to do the gang's dirty work. His downfall was a major victory for law enforcement, but it came only after several lives were lost. Beyond Hamza, the Mali Boys operated with a fluid but lethal structure. Olders, a few men in their 20s who had been around since the gang's start, acted as shot callers, controlling the drug supply and planning big moves. Youngers, often schoolboys as young as 13 or 14, were the runners and grunts, eager to earn respect, or simply scared to refuse. If they survived and proved themselves, they moved up the ranks. One of those was Ayoub Majdoulin, who by 19 had graduated from being a county lines courier to a frontline enforcer, as evidenced by his role in Jaden's murder. Ayoub's case is emblematic. He was both a victim and a perpetrator, groomed by the gang, yet capable of horrifying violence on its behalf. The gang also had its share of specialists. Some members were known as talented car thieves or weapon procurers, needed skills for missions like the drive-by shootings and raids. Others had ties to organized crime networks beyond the streets, hooking the Mali Boys up with bulk drug supplies or even firearms. Unusually, girls and young women also played roles, often as mules or lookouts, capitalizing on the fact they drew less suspicion from police. But when it came to actual violence, the Mali Boys were overwhelmingly young men. They created a persona of being faceless and everywhere, no single leader strutting on Instagram Live, but rather a hidden swarm. One local study noted how secretive the Mali Boys were, deliberately working hard to remain anonymous to the police and local agencies. This cloak-and-dagger approach made it harder for outsiders to pin them down. Narrator VO. Still, on the streets, people knew who the shot callers were. They had nicknames whispered in fear. Some had minor fame in the neighborhood or in the UK drill music scene. We'll get to that. But for the most part, the Mali Boys liked it when their individual identities stayed low-key, and the name of the gang instilled the fear. It was a conscious strategy. As one report put it, visible gang fame was bad for business. And business, above all, is what the Mali Boys cared about. In early October 2018, as part of a coordinated sweep, 200 officers launched dawn raids on 20 addresses across East London and Essex. The Mali Boys and associated drug gangs were caught off guard. One suspected dealer literally ran for it half naked, clambering across rooftops in his boxer shorts when officers battered down his door at 5 a.m. He was eventually snagged by a helicopter's heat camera, found shivering in someone's shed out back. In another raid, police discovered a handgun stashed on top of a wardrobe and a samurai sword behind a front door, along with piles of heroin, cocaine, and cash. By the end of that morning, 19 men and 1 woman were in custody. Detective Chief Superintendent Richard Tucker, overseeing the operation, said it had been months in planning, a strike designed to decapitate the prolific drug dealers fueling violent crime in the area. These raids were in direct response to what police called a drugs turf war in Waltham Forest. In the preceding months of 2018, there had been at least 3 fatal shootings in that borough alone, including the drive-by killing of 19-year-old Guled Farah in Walthamstow. Each incident piled more pressure on law enforcement. The message from the community was clear: do something. So the police did. They not only carried out local raids, but also worked with other forces in places like Norfolk, where the Mali Boys' county lines were active. Operations like Norfolk's Operation Gravity saw over 1,000 arrests, many of them London gang members caught plying the drug trade out in the shires. Among those scooped up were Mali Boys foot soldiers who thought they could hide in sleepy towns, only to find police waiting as soon as they stepped off the train. Over time, these efforts scored some wins. Aside from the big arrests of killers like Hamza ul Haq and Ayoub Majdoulin, in November 2021, 5 members of the Mali Boys were convicted for running a county lines network into Essex. They were handed lengthy prison sentences, cutting off one tentacle of the gang's drug supply. Each major prosecution painted a fuller picture of the gang's operation, giving the public rare glimpses into how the Mali Boys functioned. Courts heard about teenagers coerced into selling drugs, about coded text messages ordering hits, about stashes of knives and machetes ready to be used at a moment's notice. Yet, as heavy as the crackdowns have been, they come after the damage is done. For the families of victims, police action brought only partial comfort. The community of Waltham Forest had been living in fear during those violent years. Many residents wouldn't let their kids walk alone to school. Youth clubs and outreach workers struggled to dissuade youngsters from the allure of gang life, often finding themselves outgunned by the gang's resources or intimidated into silence. Particularly affected was the British Somali community, from which many Mali Boys members hailed. Their parents had fled war and chaos in Somalia in the 1990s, only to find a different kind of conflict here. In some heartbreaking cases, Somali mothers literally sent their sons back to East Africa to save them from London's gangs. Community organisers in London estimated that hundreds of teens were sent to stay with relatives in Somalia or Somaliland, despite the dangers there because their parents believed it was safer than the streets of London. "We are refugees," one mother told The Guardian. "If we cannot keep our children safe, we move on." It's a stark measure of desperation, sending a child to a conflict-torn country in hopes he avoids a knife in London. The community's response has been a mix of fear and resilience. There have been peace marches in memory of victims like Jaden and Elijah, public forums with metropolitan police officials grilled by residents, and increased funding, however modest, for youth projects in Waltham Forest. The local council even won a bid to become the London Borough of Culture in 2019, trying to shed a positive light on the area even as it grappled with crime. But such initiatives take time to bear fruit. In the meantime, the Mali Boys saga has forced London to confront uncomfortable truths about child exploitation, poverty, and gang culture right on its doorstep. Each arrest and conviction was a step forward, but also a reminder of how entrenched the problem had become. The Mali Boys' influence isn't confined to crime pages and police reports, it's also woven into the culture of London's streets. In particular, the gang and its offshoots have made a mark on the UK drill and trap music scene. Operating under the name Mali Strip, a nod to their Somali roots and territory. Members of the gang double as rappers and producers, channeling their experiences into music. This is a phenomenon seen with many London gangs. Real-world beefs spilling into lyrics. Music videos serving as both creative expression and thinly veiled taunts. For the Mali Boys, music became another arena to assert their presence. A number of drill artists are associated with Mali Strip. Names like Richie, Baby Main, Riddler, AK, S10th, M1, and Rondo Montana have gained traction on platforms like YouTube and SoundCloud. Their songs often reference the gritty life on the Strip, slang for their turf, and make allusions to the hustle and violence that the Mali Boys are known for. In one track, 41 Gelato, Richie and Baby Main collaborate, blending melodic auto-tune with stark lyrics about getting money and dodging foes. The video garnered hundreds of thousands of views, the comments section filled with flame emojis and shout-outs to Malistrip. To their fans, these artists are putting British Somali identity on the map, rapping in English sprinkled with Somali words, slang like lakag for money or huyo for mom, and even referencing traditional Somali foods in their rhymes. It's a representation that the older generation never saw growing up. Vice magazine noted that this surge of Somali talent, including the Mali Strip rappers, has given a once underrepresented community a powerful voice in UK music. But with authenticity comes controversy. These drill tracks double as street anthems and sometimes as gang propaganda. Lyrics can contain coded boasts about real events, a stabbing here, a robbery there, which to insiders clearly tie back to incidents in the Mali Boys feud. Opposing gangs listen too, and they respond in their own songs. It's a dangerous call and response that has, in other cases in London, led to more violence. The authorities have taken note. There have been instances where drill music videos get removed from YouTube at police request for inciting violence. Some Mali strip videos tiptoe on that line, with rappers brandishing knives or making gun gestures on camera. Yet it's also a form of storytelling, a grim reportage from the front lines of urban struggle. The Mali Boys have also permeated news and media, turning into almost an urban legend. Tabloids and broadsheets alike have run features on them, dubbing them London's most feared gang, or highlighting their earnings and brutality. A 2019 Telegraph report, for instance, detailed how the Mali Boys raked in up to $50K a week selling drugs and noted their uncompromising brutality, even by London Gangland standards. The name Mali Boys evokes a mix of fascination and fear, a case study for think pieces on failed integration of refugee communities for some, or on austerity and youth services cuts for others. They've been the subject of academic research, council debates, and yes, even Vice documentaries like this one. In the public imagination, the Mali Boys symbolize the new face of organized street gangs, multicultural, media-aware, even in their secrecy, and entangled with everything from drill music to transnational trafficking. Yet there's another side to that cultural impact. Some community members worry that the glorification of the Mali Boys in music and media could lure more youngsters into emulating them. When a Mali strip track racks up millions of views, a teenager in East London might see notoriety and street fame as achievable, even cool. On the flip side, others argue that the music is shining a light on the social issues behind the gang: unemployment, identity, marginalization, forcing listeners to confront why groups like the Mali Boys exist in the first place. As always, Vice takes the view that understanding the story in full, the glamour and the gore, is essential to having that conversation. The story of the Mali Boys is still being written. As of today, many of its key players are behind bars, serving long sentences for murder, drug trafficking, and other crimes. The gang has been dealt heavy blows by law enforcement crackdowns. But on the streets of East London, new struggles are constantly emerging. The drug markets the Mali Boys once dominated haven't disappeared. Other groups and remaining members will undoubtedly attempt to fill any void. The cycle threatens to continue. As long as there are profits to be made and disenfranchised youths to recruit, the risk of another Mali Boys, or a resurgence of the same gang under new leadership, looms large. Still, there are glimmers of hope. Community leaders in Waltham Forest are more mobilized than ever to steer kids away from gang life. Former gang members are speaking out about their experiences, warning others not to follow the same path. And the dialogue around issues like county lines and youth grooming has reached the national stage. The Mali Boys, in their own dark way, forced Britain to confront the reality that children can be both victims and perpetrators in the drug trade. A wake-up call that has spurred new policies and policing strategies. In the end, the tale of the Mali Boys isn't just about one gang. It's about a community and a city caught between hardship and hope. It's about how a group of young men, many of them kids, became both the product and the provocateurs of a system that failed to protect them. It's a story of survival and ambition, twisted into violence. As we leave the housing estates of Leighton and Walthamstow, the first rays of sunlight reveal murals and memorials, testaments to lives lost too soon. The concrete is stained with memory. The Mali Boys wanted to remain invisible, but their actions made them infamous. By shining a light on them, we also shine a light on the conditions that created them. The cameras might stop rolling and the headlines might fade, but the work on these streets, to reclaim them, to heal them, carries on. In the words of one grieving mother, enough is enough. This has been a Vice true crime investigation, Inside the Mali Boys, a gang story still unfolding amidst the resilient heart of East London. Jayden's murder was the most infamous flashpoint of the Beaumont Mali feud, but it was far from the only one. The streets of Leighton and Walthamstow saw tit-for-tat attacks as each side retaliated for the last offence. In one incident, a young Beaumont Crew member was stabbed outside a chicken shop. In another, Mali Boys assailants on mopeds chased a rival through back alleys with knives drawn. Much of this violence played out below the media radar, considered just gang-on-gang crime. But innocents were caught in the crossfire too. In March 2018, around the same time the feud was escalating, 20-year-old Joseph Williams Torres was sitting in a van in Walthamstow when he was shot dead in a case of mistaken identity. He wasn't in a gang at all, just a local young man in the wrong place. His killers were later linked to the Mali Boys, apparently out hunting for rivals that night. Joseph's death underscored the toll this turf war took on the wider community. Anyone could become collateral damage. Mothers in these neighborhoods started warning their sons to be home before dark. Murals and street memorials with flowers and candles appeared on street corners, heartbreaking testaments to teenage lives lost. The feud also exposed the disturbing tactics both gangs used to groom and exploit youths. Older gang members, sometimes not even that old themselves, maybe early 20s, would present themselves as big brothers or protectors to kids. They hung around school gates, arcades, and estates, scouting for recruits. A typical grooming scenario might start with something innocuous, buying a 13-year-old new trainers or meals, giving him a sense of belonging. Next comes an easy job: just hold on to this package for me, or stand lookout and I'll give you $50. Before long, that kid is riding the train to a far-off seaside town with a phone and a list of addict clients, carrying a stash of crack cocaine in his backpack. By the time parents notice their child is skipping school or coming home with unexplained cash, the gang's hooks are in deep. Threats follow. If you try to back out, we know where your family lives. It's a blend of flattery, coercion, and terror that proves devastatingly effective in drawing youths into crime. According to one youth worker, many of these kids don't even see themselves as victims because the gang lifestyle is sold to them as a glamorous hustle. They're told that "let's get rich" is the ultimate goal, and that together they'll rise out of poverty. But in reality, the vast majority of these groomed youths end up either in prison, in the hospital, or dead before they see any real riches. For the law-abiding residents of Leighton and surrounding areas, the Beaumont Crew versus Mali Boys conflict turned daily life into a gauntlet of fear. Many locals felt like hostages in their own neighborhood. Parents kept children indoors, and teens who wanted no part of gangs still had to navigate the minefield of gang territories. Wearing the wrong color or walking down the wrong street could provoke a confrontation. In some areas, youth clubs and libraries became refuges where kids could feel safe from recruitment or attack. But even those were occasionally stalked by older gang members on the lookout. The community also banded together to push back. Churches, youth organizations, and residents' groups started peace marches and held vigils for victims. They set up anonymous tip lines and campaigned for more police presence. In a symbolic move, knife amnesty bins were installed at local community centers, big metal containers where anyone could drop off a blade, no questions asked. Close-up of a knife bin overflowing with turned-in knives and machetes. These bins filled up regularly, a stark indicator of how many weapons were circulating on the streets. Yet even as dozens of knives were surrendered, many residents knew hundreds more remained out there. The trauma in the community was real. Elementary school children walked past crime scene tape on their way to school. Families mourned sons lost both to violence and to prison cells. The Metropolitan Police faced a daunting challenge in quelling this gang war. Waltham Forest became a focal point for the Met's gang unit and Operation Trident, the special unit for gun crime, as violence spiked. Officers carried out dawn raids on suspected gang members' homes, seizing drugs, weapons, and phones. They used gang injunctions, court orders, to ban known LGR and Mali Boys members from associating with each other or even entering certain areas. In some cases, youth workers accompanied police to try to coax kids away from gang life at the moment of arrest. But the gangs proved resourceful and highly organized. They learned to evade surveillance by ditching flashy smartphones and using old-school burner phones, basic Nokias that are harder to monitor. They often avoided the social media bravado that got other gangs caught, operating in the shadows instead. In fact, the Mali Boys in particular were known to shun posting on YouTube or Snapchat about their exploits, which made gathering intelligence on them tougher. Police even found evidence that gang members were tracking the police, recording undercover officers' license plates and researching their personal details to intimidate law enforcement. It was a cat-and-mouse game, with gangs adapting quickly to every police tactic. Throughout 2018 and 2019, several major police operations targeted the county lines linked to these gangs. Large-scale investigations led to multiple convictions. In one success, 5 Mali Boys members were convicted in 2021 for running Class A drugs to Essex, disrupting one of their lucrative county lines. The Beaumont Crew's hierarchy also took hits, with a number of senior figures taken off the streets for drug trafficking, weapons charges, or conspiracy offenses. Often these didn't make headlines, they were the quiet removals of mid-level gangsters that cumulatively weakened the group. By 2020, local authorities also embraced a public health approach to the gang problem, investing in youth outreach, mentoring programs for at-risk kids, and job training, trying to drain the talent pool that gangs like LGR and Mali drew from. It was clear that pure enforcement wasn't enough. The community had to be part of the solution. Runs. It's just past midnight on a quiet estate in Leighton, East London. Under the sickly glow of streetlights, a grainy CCTV camera records a scene of sudden violence. A scooter skids sideways as a car rams it at full speed. Figures in dark hoodies leap out and set upon the fallen rider with knives flashing. The 14-year-old victim, bleeding on the asphalt, is named Jaden Moody, a schoolboy caught up in a brutal feud. His murder that night in January 2019 would shock Britain. It was no random attack, but a targeted hit in a gang war between 2 of East London's most notorious crews, the Beaumont Crew, also known as LGR, Let's Get Rich, and their rivals, the Mali Boys. To understand how we got here, we travel back to the late 1990s. The backdrop is the Beaumont Road estate in Leighton, a warren of concrete housing blocks that became infamous as a cradle of gang culture. Here, a group of local youths coalesced into what became known as the Beaumont Crew. By the 2000s, the Beaumont Crew was the longest established gang in Waltham Forest, with an estimated 100 members ranging from their early teens to mid-30s. They controlled local drug dealing and built a reputation on the street as a force to be reckoned with. Early studies of London gangs even identified Beaumont as one of the dominant players in the borough. The crew formed alliances beyond their home turf, looking to expand their criminal enterprise beyond just one postcode. Back then, it was all about territory, repping your block. The Beaumont Crew had the sprawling Beaumont estate as their stronghold, and they fiercely defended it against any incursion. But nothing in London stays static. Over the years, turf lines shifted and alliances churned. Neighbouring gangs clashed with Beaumont. An old incident from the early 2000s is still remembered locally, when members of the Oliver Close gang robbed a Beaumont Crew drug dealer, sparking a bitter dispute. At one point, smaller rival crews like the Boundary Boys and Cathal Crew teamed up to challenge Beaumont's dominance and take over the drug trade in the area. The street landscape was constantly in flux, with gangs splintering, merging, and vying for control of estates and corners. Through it all, the Beaumont Crew endured, evolving from a neighborhood gang into a leaner, more profit-driven operation. The 2010s, the old Beaumont estate itself was undergoing drastic changes. Tower blocks that once housed generations of working-class families and provided cover for gang activity were demolished and redeveloped. Shiny new apartment buildings rose in their place, some sold to private owners, breaking up the estate's traditional community. If you go down there, no one's there now. Everyone's moved off, a local resident remarked, noting that the people living on Beaumont now are not gang members. This regeneration disrupted the Beaumont Crew's home base. Half the people who say they're from Beaumont don't even live there anymore. Yet the gang didn't disappear, it adapted. Freed from the physical confines of the estate, the Beaumont Crew began to operate in a more dispersed way, and their ethos shifted. They adopted the moniker LGR, Let's Get Rich, a motto that signaled a new focus on money and enterprise over postcode pride. For these young men, many of them from impoverished backgrounds, the lure of fast cash was a stronger motivator than old-school turf loyalty. LGR became both their identity and their mission statement. Drug dealing was the golden ticket, and the crew pursued it with a ruthless entrepreneurial zeal. They started to resemble an organized crime outfit as much as a street gang, with older members acting like shadowy CEOs and teenage youngers as their foot soldiers. By this time, Leighton's E10 postcode, once firmly Beaumont territory, had become a contested marketplace. A new faction was rising from within their ranks, younger, hungrier, and even more ruthless. Around 2015, a splinter group broke away from the Beaumont Crew, forming their own outfit that would soon terrorize East London, the Mali Boys. Initially, many of the Mali Boys were in fact former Beaumont Crew members or protégés, hence locals sometimes calling them the Beaumont Boys in early days. But this wasn't just a rebrand, it was a full-blown mutiny. The Mali Boys had a different vision. They embraced the new school gang mentality, economically driven, businesslike, and secretive. They cared less about postcode beef for its own sake, and more about expanding drug markets and making money, unless territory was directly tied to those profits. The name Mali nods to the Somalian heritage of many of its OGs, though the gang quickly became ethnically diverse. Waltham Forest's gang landscape was now transformed. The Mali Boys rapidly rose to become the most dominant gang in the borough, and the Beaumont Crew, now tagged as LGR, found itself facing a deadly rival for power. The heart of this conflict was still Leighton. Postcode E10, covering Leighton and nearby E17 in Walthamstow, became battlegrounds. The Beaumont Crew had its roots in E10, while the Mali Boys spread from Leighton into Walthamstow and beyond. They vied for control of housing estates, street corners, and stash houses, wherever they could sell drugs. The old Beaumont estate might have been rebuilt and gentrified, but other corners of Leighton provided fertile ground for gang activity. Run-down tower blocks, back alleys, chicken shops, and youth clubs turned into recruiting grounds and occasional war zones. The Mali Boys didn't hesitate to push into Beaumont LGR turf, and vice versa. Each side began staking claim not just to streets, but to drug supply lines that stretched far outside London. Both gangs quickly realized the real money wasn't in just hanging around the estate, selling $10 bags to locals. It was in the county lines drug trade. This means running heroin, crack, and cocaine from big city suppliers into smaller towns and rural areas, using dedicated phone lines and young runners. The payoff was huge. At their peak, a crew like the Mali Boys could rake in up to $50,000 a week from narcotic sales. The Beaumont Crew, under the Let's Get Rich banner, wanted their cut of that action. They set up their own county lines, competing fiercely for territory and clients. Addicts in places as far as Essex and Norfolk started receiving doorstep deliveries of London-sourced drugs. In one case, police later busted a ring of Mali Boys members ferrying crack and heroin into Essex market towns, a glimpse into the lucrative pipeline that both Mali and LGR were operating. Running these drug lines required manpower. Kids, some as young as 12 or 13, became the pawns in this operation. Older gang members would groom vulnerable youths from local schools or troubled homes, recruiting them with promises of designer clothes, cash, and a sense of belonging. These teenagers would then be sent out of London on dangerous missions, staying in strangers' homes, so-called trap houses, cutting and bagging drugs, and selling on street corners far from their own neighborhoods. Many were effectively trafficked, ferried to distant towns to work long hours dealing, all while under threat of violence if they messed up. As one official report noted, young people have been recruited and used as drug runners, sometimes leaving the London area for cross-county lines drug dealing, organized and paid for by the Mali Boys' elders. The younger members, 12-17 in both gangs, were increasingly active in serious crime, both as perpetrators and victims, often carrying knives and occasionally firearms as they defended their patch or robbed rivals. With so much at stake, money, reputation, and territory, it was inevitable that violence would explode between the Beaumont Crew, LGR, and the upstart Mali Boys. The feud turned East London neighborhoods into a tinderbox. Stabbings, shootings, and beatings started to punctuate the struggle for dominance. Both gangs armed themselves with knives and machetes as weapons of choice, but guns sometimes came into play too. According to police and community reports, the Mali Boys quickly earned a name as the most business-driven, violent and ruthless gang around, and the Beaumont Crew was one of their chief rivals. One particularly shocking episode of this war was the murder of Jaden Moody, mentioned earlier. Jaden was just 14, but he had been lured into working for the Beaumont Crew, LGR, allegedly running drugs for them on a scooter the night he died. In the eyes of the Mali Boys who attacked him, Jaden was competition, an enemy courier. After ramming him off the road, a group of Mali Boys stabbed him 9 times on the pavement, killing him on the spot. The sheer brutality of murdering a child in cold blood sent shockwaves through the community. It later came out in court that one of the attackers, 19-year-old Ayub Majdoulin, had previously been flagged as a victim of child grooming himself, identified by social services as a potential modern slavery case. This grim irony, a victim turned perpetrator, highlights how deeply the cycle of exploitation runs. As we move into the mid-2020s, the Beaumont Crew, LGR, is not the force it once was. Deprived of their geographic heartland and pounded by years of crackdowns, the gang has fragmented. Some older members aged out of street life, a few lucky ones transitioned into semi-legitimate jobs, or simply lay low to avoid further trouble. Others were absorbed into bigger criminal networks. It's rumored that some Beaumont Crew alumni now work directly for larger drug supply rings outside London, essentially becoming businessmen in the narcotics trade. The younger generation of Beaumont-affiliated youth either fell victim to the violence, got arrested, or in some cases defected to the Mali Boys or other emerging crews for protection. The LGR brand still exists in whispers, scrawled as graffiti tags on alley walls or muttered in certain music lyrics. But as a cohesive gang, LGR's presence in Leighton has dwindled. Meanwhile, the Mali Boys consolidated much of the area's drug trade under their franchise. They had subsumed some smaller gangs, like the Drive Crew and Boundary Boys alliances mentioned in local reports, into their operation. Yet they too paid a price. Many of their top leaders are now either dead or serving long prison terms. The feared Mali Boys general, who orchestrated multiple murders, was sentenced to at least 36 years in prison in 2023. These successes give some hope that the worst of the blood feud has passed. But on the flip side, the power vacuum could lead to new violence as remaining members fight over the spoils. East London's gang map is ever-changing. Today's LGR and Mali Boys could morph into tomorrow's new gangs with different names, but the underlying issues remain. The story of the Beaumont Crew and Mali Boys has also seeped into the broader culture of UK youth and music. London's drill music scene, a raw offshoot of hip-hop that often chronicles gang life, has been both a reflection of and an influence on this gang war. The Mali Boys in particular cultivated a presence in drill under the name Mali Strip, with several of their members becoming rappers who gained notoriety online. In music videos, masked young men from East London boast about getting money and avenging fallen friends, sometimes alluding to real events in coded language. Tracks by artists affiliated with Mali Strip rack up hundreds of thousands of views, blurring the line between entertainment and reality. According to Vice, the Mali Strip collective even helped shine a spotlight on Britain's Somali youth in the drill scene, turning their street rep into a form of cultural capital. On the Beaumont LGR side, there's less of a public musical footprint, perhaps because they valued anonymity or were overshadowed by Mali's output. Still, the "let's get rich" mantra itself is something of a cultural meme. In corners of East London, you can hear kids who weren't even born when Beaumont Estate was at its peak use the phrase half-jokingly or aspirationally. It symbolizes a certain hustler's ambition that has permeated youth culture, the idea of rising from the streets to riches by any means necessary. Unfortunately, in this context, it also glorified the drug trade. Community workers now try to counteract that narrative by promoting alternative ways to get rich, through education or legal entrepreneurship. But the allure of the gang lifestyle remains strong in the absence of other opportunities. The saga of the Beaumont Crew, LGR, and the Mali Boys is a true crime story still unfolding. It's a story of poverty, pride, and profit, how a once close-knit group of friends from a housing estate turned into rivals spilling blood over drug turf. It's about the teenagers who are both perpetrators and prey, drawn into a world that promises fast money and respect, but often delivers prison or death. And it's about a community caught in the crossfire, where ordinary people have shown extraordinary resilience just to live their daily lives. As the camera pulls back from Leighton's streets, from the empty basketball courts where gang tags stain the walls, from the last wilted bouquet tied to a lamppost where a teenager fell, we're left with an uneasy quiet. The Beaumont Crew may have got rich for a time, and the Mali Boys may have reigned in the drug trade, but at a devastating cost. In the end, the cycle of violence leaves behind far more loss than wealth. East London carries on, scarred but hopeful that the next generation will choose a different path, and that the true legacy of the Beaumont Crew and LGR will be a lesson learned, rather than a trend followed.